Welcome to the TechForum webcast. Thank you for joining us. TechForum has been running conferences in New York City since 1995 for IT professionals who work in cybersecurity for mid to large organizations. The TechForum mission is to provide a platform for sharing our experiences, managing new and disruptive technologies that improve the competitive advantage of the businesses we work for. If you'd like to learn more about us, please visit us at www.techforum.com. In this webcast, our moderator will be Priscilla Tate, the founder and director of TechForum. We look forward to hearing any feedback and are happy you've joined us.
Hello, I'm Priscilla Tate, the founder and director of TechForum. Today we're speaking with two individuals who live on the cutting edge of enterprise cybersecurity defense. It's an area we call breach and attack simulation. They work for Cymulate, an Israeli company with a stellar research unit of security intelligence professionals who have experience in both private and in military intelligence. With a nod to the obvious that enterprise cybersecurity professionals must defend against attacks that are criminal in intent, we're not going to dwell on scare tactics. Instead, we're going to focus on new developments in proactive cyber defense, an area that has an interesting evolution in large enterprise organizations. Let's meet our panelists. First up is Moshe Elias, Director of Product Marketing, Breach and Attack Simulation at Cymulate. Tell us about your background and your work with Cymulate.
Hi. As you can see, I'm a veteran, been around in security, well, maybe since dinosaurs walked the earth. I've had several roles on the side of customers, consultancy, and providers. I worked in the military, and I was the co-lead for a new and secure infrastructure for a classified unit. That's where I learned the skills, basically. I went on to consulting for various government offices and telecom providers in the area of security. Then went to Cisco, which was a ride from '96 to 2008. Fantastic period, a great place to work.
Great period.
Yeah, great period. Checkpoint, where I gained more expertise in security, went more the business side of things. And a brief stint with a company that did security for the mass market, which I find extremely interesting. And now I'm here at Cymulate. What we do basically is we enable companies use our platform to validate the effectiveness of their security posture, their security controls. And now I don't say just security controls because we look at 4 domains. We look at the domain of the intelligence that could be gathered about a company. We look at the domain of security employee awareness, or employee security awareness, sorry, which is key because they're still deemed to be the weakest link in the security chain. We look at security controls and test their effectiveness. That's the most significant part of what we do. This is the definition of breach and attack simulation. And we look at the infrastructure segmentation policies. We test them, their configurations, in order to show how resistant they are and what can be done to improve their resistance to lateral movement. So it's no longer a question of security control validation. It's a question of security validation. And being able to do that continuously is key because we live in a very, very dynamic environment. Business drives change, security threat landscape changes frequently, security controls are modified, updated constantly, and all of these, without any automated continuous mechanism of quality assurance is key. It's key now to be able to do that because from a minor human error to a considerable security gap in a failing in a security control, the range is very broad of how you can provide an adversary a way in.
Yes, and I like the way you expressed 2 of the priorities of Cymulate. They both dealt with security and the human factor. And I think we all agree it's the weakest link. And in a way, the role of the CISO is that of the advocate for security awareness among business users. So your deep experience in that area acknowledges a really huge part of the job. Let's turn to Mike. Mike DeNapoli, Solutions Engineer, Cymulate. You're based in New York, correct?
I am, yes.
Good. So tell us about your job, your company, what you really do.
Yep. So basically, as a solutions architect with Cymulate, my job is to help customers and partners and everyone from the IT admins up through the CISO and CTO to figure out how they can best work with the security of their own environments. And coming from the world of identity and access management and the SIM, SOC, MSSP world, I really got a chance to see how things are done in the world, including regulatory assessments and pen testing and all this other great stuff. And when I got the chance to come here to work for Cymulate, it was really interesting for me because it allowed me to see how the real world can influence the next generation of technology. And the issue here that we have the ability to adapt to changes, but only if we know that those changes have occurred, only if we're testing for the things that are being used by threat actors today. So that was a big eye-opener for me, that we have the technology to do this, and that folks like Cymulate have been building it for some time and offering it for some time. And I wanted to help to get the word out. So I came on board and started working with our customers here.
Well, I'd like to spend some time with both of you talking about the whole concept of breach and attack simulation and proactive security. Can you kind of, this is a phrase that we've been using for 10 years, proactive security, but I think the meaning has shifted over time. Can you tell me what you mean today, or maybe tell us how it shifted?
Yeah, so the idea of proactive security in its current form is relatively new. There have been other forms of it. As you said, it's an evolved term that's evolved over time. The original definitions were more along the defensive world. We see something happening in the world, we start patching, we have vulnerability management, we have SOAR solutions that look to update things throughout the environment. We're making sure that all the updates are occurring on all the different machines. But from a defensive perspective, that still leaves a problem in that these threats evolve. And unlike even maybe 5 or 7 years ago, they evolve very quickly now. And so new variants, new methods, combinations of techniques all come together to produce a new threat in speeds that we never thought would have been possible a few years ago. And so now we need to shift from purely reactive security, where we see something occurring and then we make sure that everything is protected against it when we see it affecting us, to proactive security, where we are going out and purposely testing these systems in a safe way, don't get me wrong, but we're testing these systems to see if they can withstand these evolving threats and these new threats before we see them affecting the organization, before we see them affecting the enterprise. And so that's what proactive security has really come to mean now, a shift from defensive preparedness to offensive investigation and experimentation so that we can get out ahead of this stuff.
I feel that it's not just experimentation. A company like yours obviously has a lot of expertise in the technology. What are the new developments that you've managed to incorporate into Cymulate that sets you apart, say, from other people in this area, other vendors in this space?
There are a few. Most significantly, Cymulate brings a comprehensiveness to the table that doesn't exist in a lot of the marketplace, in that we don't just want to look at what the industry calls post-exploitation, this idea of an attacker has already gotten a foothold. They've already taken over one machine and we want to see where they can go. We do that, of course, but that's only one component of the whole system. We're also looking at how the security controls behave when they're faced with thousands of different methods and techniques that are used by attackers, and how defense in depth works. And that's a key idea because no single security platform is going to be able to stop everything. We know that is the case.
Yeah.
So this idea of compensating controls, where if one control is weak in an area, another control is strong in that area, you also want to be able to test that. And it all needs to be done safely. That's the key.
Yeah, safely. In fact, we call this session, get over your fear of breaking the business
Yeah.
application. That sort of goes to a like a accepted kind of motto. If it works, don't fix it. What has changed technically that Cymulate does that's really effective?
Yeah, so first things first, to expand on your question, if it's broke, don't fix it is a very defensive methodology of thinking. It's a very reactive methodology of thinking. And the point right now is that if it's broke, it's just because somebody hasn't figured out how to break it yet. And it will be broken, and we need to know it's going to break ahead of time. And that's really where tools like Cymulate come in, is we can do this in a way that can prove whether or not it can be broken, but not actually break it. And that is where BAS solutions in general come in, is this idea of being able to run simulations that will highlight any weaknesses or any gaps, but they're not going to take production systems offline. They're not going to disrupt business operations in order for these simulations to occur. And that's critical. That's where we've really shown here at Cymulate, is that we could do that across so many different aspects of data security and system security.
One of the questions we asked members that were before we got together to do this was we asked them about their pen testing. We asked them about vulnerability scans and breach and attack simulation. What is the logical progression as you see it between these different forms of defense?
Well, there is a logical progression, actually. The first one is this idea of the head in the sand. If I don't see it, they can't see me. That's where companies usually start. And to their credit, most organizations, and I've run into very few that are still in that mode of thinking, most organizations realize even if they're not well known, even if they're not visible, they're still a target. And then you move into the opposite side of the spectrum. And we saw, I personally saw many different companies that they were so terrified by what could happen to the organization that they were taking months and sometimes years to make a decision on how to move forward. And that's almost just as bad as ignoring the situation, because you have months or years where an attacker can get a head start. And so you want to get people to the middle of that spectrum. And the middle of that spectrum is, I understand that there is a problem, and I understand that I need to act, and I know that I can act. And when we're talking about the results from the pen testing and the other solutions that are in use, the first step that we typically see out of one of these two ends of the spectrum toward the center is, all right, I'm bound by some kind of regulation. And therefore, I'm going to do a pen test once a year because the regulation says I have to do a pen test once a year. That's a good first step. And I was happy to see the results that we got, because it does indicate that a lot of companies are taking that step. But it produces a secondary problem, and that is that if you're doing a pen test once a year, you have 11 months of that year where you don't have up-to-date information on what's going on from a security perspective.
Yeah, that's the crux of the matter. That really is. Moshe, do you want to jump in here and talk about some of the advantages you feel Cymulate offers a prospective large enterprise?
Yeah, I think that we're seeing a lot of spend on security, right? The security market is growing significantly, and even these days we're seeing massive growth, and so companies put a lot of capital expenditure into their infrastructure in order to protect them, and yet for a minor percentage of that spend, they assume that everything is working because they buy the best brands, they read all the reviews, and they decide that without naming specific companies, this is the best firewall, this is the best IPS, this is the best endpoint security, EDR, whatever, and they install it. And yet it's a well-known secret in the industry that buyer beware. I mean, if you don't configure it, set it up properly, it's useless. It's useless, 1% of the time, but that's enough, right? So the requirement for continuous validation is key here. To be able to, you've bought a Ferrari, you're going to take it to the racetrack, you're going to test it out to the extreme and enjoy it. You're not going to use it to commute to school and back at 25 miles an hour, right? So you really need to test this out. And it's not enough to do it, like Mike said, once a year. I mean, a pen test, there's also a difference in approach, right?
Significantly.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think Mike is going to talk a bit about that. The key difference between them is, can I get into the network is what a pen tester will do. And are my security controls working optimally? That's what breach and attack simulation does. They do complement each other. I mean, we don't advocate companies to say, oh, I don't need to do pen testing anymore. It's a different approach. It answers a different question. I think that relying just on pen tests, as we have done, as the industry has done for about 25 years, right? That's been the staple of security testing. I think that that is not enough anymore. We are moving at a rapid pace, and COVID-19 just showed us how rapid we can and have when we have to move.
Yes, I think a lot of companies also in the early days of pen testing found out it was very difficult to do with their existing staff.
Oh, absolutely.
We did find out that from our members that finding staff with expertise, having enough staff was a huge issue. So is it a best practice actually that when you're doing a breach and attack simulation that you should bring in outsiders?
Well, when you're doing a pen test, you need to bring in outsiders. When you're doing breach and attack simulation, like with Cymulate, it's certainly something that can be done internally because it's a third-party service, the Cymulate cloud platform, that's performing the actual simulation. So even though it's being initiated by someone internally, it is a quantifiable, it is a verifiable, independent simulation that's being done. And you kind of get the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, I mean, can I just extend on that? The reason that, we have security researchers in our company, and their primary focus is to make sure that that platform has all the knowledge, all the intellectual property, all the capabilities, so that someone who doesn't have pen testing skills, who's not a member of a red team, can take the platform, run tests out of the box with, all the best practice templates that we put inside it, and say, yes, I am now protected against the latest emotet threat or whatever, okay?
On their schedule and with their staff. So
Exactly.
It's not like they're contracting with Cymulate as a services organization to do these simulations. This is something they're going to control the process, they're going to initiate the simulations, but they get to take advantage of the fact that there is all this third-party knowledge and independent knowledge built into the system.
I think that needs to be stated because a lot of time your jobs put your skills in service of a business objective, and the fine tuning that's needed to keep pace with security threats and developments is not why you were hired per se. You're first and foremost a corporate citizen, and it takes a while to get that across.
However, if I could expand on that, and I do apologize for the interruption, but
no.
We have known in every other segment of business that there is an idea of segregation of duty, separation of duty, where the person in accounting who creates the PO is not the same person who writes the check to cover that PO. And this is a well-known business practice. This is a very strongly rooted business practice. And all we're saying is it needs to start coming into play in other areas of the business that it's traditionally been enforced in. So the people who are building the security systems cannot also design the tests for those systems.
Audit 101.
Yeah, it really is. And so we're not asking businesses to do anything that they're not very used to doing. We're just saying it needs to be applied to a few more areas within that enterprise.
Let's see now if we can go to some of the concrete situations that you guys have encountered with your customers and talk about some of the challenges and obstacles people typically run up against. Can you give us some flesh and blood stories that kind of show where you can be useful to other people, other companies?
So yeah, and I'm going to refer to the period. I mean, we can't ignore what the period has done, but regardless, right? We're talking about the need for continuous security validation constantly, all the time, not just during this crazy period of the pandemic. But this period has emphasized the need. I just read a survey that in order to cope with the explosion in remote workers, CISO 50%, over 50% of CISO said that they had to acquire new security controls. And 21% of them said that they had to relax security policies in order to do that. Okay, so you now have a totally, well, not totally new, but a significantly changed network architecture, right? You're using new applications, you're allowing people to do more from home, maybe in the past that you wouldn't have allowed them to do. Are you going to test that? Or are you going to say, okay, we'll do it and it works? You have to test it. And case in point, a customer of ours tested, and they found out that SSL inspection was turned off and nobody knew. It was like a big surprise. Yeah. But what that meant was that all the remote workers were not protected. Okay, and the only way they could have found out was by launching attacks and seeing which ones got through, the simulated attacks, and which ones didn't. And so, lo and behold, they had a problem. Houston, we have a problem, which was easily rectified. It was nothing significant. It was just a configuration setting with one of the providers that they engaged with. So this just emphasizes the need to be able for security to move at the same pace as the business. And another thing that is applying to that is the fact that CISOs want to be seen as business enablers. They do not want to be seen as business inhibitors. We have to provide them the tools so that they can assure that their company remains safe when the business requires them to integrate their supply chain with third parties, to integrate operational technology with information, with IT, whatever, introduce DevOps or adopt DevOps practices and roll out new applications every 2 weeks. They need to be able to keep up, do their job at keeping the company safe, and enable the business to move at a rapid pace.
Mike, do you see this kind of coalescing between security, DevOps, network operations in the organizations you work with?
Definitely, and Moshe brought up a really great point, which is that the pace of technology is getting faster and faster and faster, and we need more efficient and more effective ways to be able to test these things in real time. The other half of the equation, though, is we have a lot of enterprises with a lot of legacy technology.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
And the example that I love to use, because everybody started, if you listen to any podcast, you listen to any of these, there's all these commercials for Oracle ERP systems, NetSuite. Now, everybody knows Oracle, and everybody knows Oracle makes ERP. Why do these people have to advertise? It's because everybody's staying on the legacy ERP, and they're not moving to the new cloud-based ERP that's being continuously updated and continuously broadened, continuously developed. And it speaks to something, because those legacy systems are usually outside the rules of engagement of something like a pen test, because they're very easy to knock down. They're very temperamental. There's always that one system that never gets patched, because if we patch it, it's going to break and never start up again. And so having tools that can safely test even stuff like that becomes even more critical, because you want to know when you are going to be forced to apply a patch. You don't have a choice. This is a propagating threat. And a pen test isn't really the right way to do that, because it can endanger that system. But something like BAS that's designed to do this without causing that kind of disruption is going to make that possible. And now that legacy platform that you have, and we all have them, is something that's not going to be a clear and present danger and keeping you awake at night anymore.
We have a lot of members who tell us that that are working in these fusion centers doing agile development and trying to do it in 2 weeks. And they say they don't even take the legacy applications and try and port them. They just just focus with the new apps.
Well, you
Right.
can't. And I worked for many, many years ago, one of the leading providers of disaster recovery and HA solutions for um, a mid-frame. Let's just put it at that. We won't name names. But it was a mid-frame platform. And it was amazing how many people were on previous revisions of that operating system, because upgrading would require that so many monolithic apps had to get upgraded with it. And there were security patches in these operating system updates that just were not being applied.
Right. Right. And that just talks about the importance of the compensating security controls, doesn't it,
Yeah.
Mike? I mean,
The firewall
I
has to be rock solid. The IPS IDS has to be tracking everything. You have to have network isolation to make sure that only certain networks can talk to that legacy system. So it's not to say that we're
exactly.
going to get rid of the legacy systems overnight.
No,
We're
no,
not.
no, no. We're not.
But
We're
they can
not.
be
And there
protected
are
properly.
there's some industries that, you know, it almost it's part of their operation, especially in the pharma and health. You'll have devices, laboratories where you're not allowed to update an instance of software without FDA approval, which means that you need to test it before you're able to implement it. And this means that there are a lot of systems out there that, like you said, they are on operating systems without security patches and without, you know, being updated. And so you have to be sure that the compensating controls, the firewalls in front of it, the segmentation policies, the IPS IDS, the anti-network, whatever, these components are working optimally. And you can't just put them in place and forget about them, because maybe they're static, but the threat landscape isn't. And they'll find new ways to try and attack these systems. And unfortunately, we've seen health and we've seen pharma targeted by threat actors significantly, not only in the last period, but for the last couple of years. Children's hospitals, it's terrible.
The pharma even have their hand in medical devices, which sometimes
Yes.
are created without any, we don't understand the controls because we don't have the platform that they're making. So it's like,
No, I
how do you
spoke to
bring them up to getting
Yeah, it's a big problem.
I spoke to a DevOps leader of medical devices. He told me flat, I have to pen test my device every time in order to get FDA approval so that I can provide it to my customer. I'm not talking about the delay of getting it to market. I mean, that's insignificant. But that just shows how the regulation is there to make sure that everyone is safe on the one hand, but it is, I wouldn't say an obstacle, but there is a give and take here that needs to be taken into account.
well, let's move into the best practices and workarounds. You both have your finger on the pulse. We did a survey question asking people to rank, you know, what was most important to them in a product. How would you, what would you list out as the most important things that someone needs to consider if they're a large organization, not a medium size, for a breach and attack simulation purpose test?
So in an enterprise environment, there are a couple of key things to focus on. One, you need multi-tenancy. And the reason you need that is in an enterprise, every business unit acts almost like a separate company. And so there are going to be different people, and there are going to be different systems, and there are going to be different obligations. So you want something that could treat each business unit as if they were kind of their own company. So that's one. And then two, you want flexibility. Some business units will have all of the security bells and whistles. Others are going to have a much smaller subset. So you want to be able to say, I'm going to get X number of seats that have all of these different things, and I'm going to get Y number of seats that just have these core things, because that's all they use. And then third, you want comprehensiveness. As an enterprise, you are working on defense in depth, but you still want to know how each individual security control is working. As an enterprise, you are going to be looking at network segregation, but you still want to know how each system is doing. And so you need a platform that's going to be able to do both. And then finally, it needs to be something that your people, the people you have right now, whether they are cybersecurity or information technology or a combination of both, that they are going to feel comfortable in using on a very regular basis. This is not something you do once a year or twice a year or once a quarter. This is something you're doing once a week or once a month on different systems each time. So those are the three big things. This ability to treat business units as their own entities, that flexibility, the comprehensiveness so that you can apply the right simulations to the right areas of your business, and tools that can be used by the people that you have already, your existing IT folks, without putting too much of an undue burden on them or asking them to attempt to do things that are things that they just don't know how to do and would require a tremendous amount of training.
I'd like to add to Mike's answer. I think that the large enterprise will be looking more for customization capabilities, since they do have more complex environments, and typically they would have pen testing or red team skills in-house available in order to utilize the automation and repeatability capabilities of a breach and attack simulation platform like Cymulate. When we look at smaller companies, and I must say that for me, in the security industry, I think that it's shameful that we always focus on the large companies. I think that small companies, even consumers, need to be as secure as large enterprises, because when it hits them 100%. It's not a statistic. And small businesses can go out of business if they're breached. The impact on them can be devastating. But anyway, going back to the point, I think that comprehensiveness is key. Being able to have one platform that is simple to use, simple to deploy, but provides a very broad assessment of a company's security posture is key also for mid-sized businesses, small businesses. I mean, small businesses who don't have security personnel. This is something that MSPs and MSSPs should be providing them as a quality assurance. This is how we are protecting you, and look, we're measuring it with a third-party technology. I think that is also key. I want to see people, small companies, big companies, secure. There's a threat out there, and it needs to be. We need to be protected against it.
Yeah,
I think. Go ahead.
There's a critical component to what Moshe was just saying that is missed in many enterprises. Enterprises work with other companies. They work with other businesses. Those businesses are sometimes small and mid-sized businesses. And except for something like the Garmin hack very recently, all of the major attacks that we have seen have not directly targeted the enterprise. So not only do these enterprises themselves need to have these tools and be using these tools in their environment, but they need to start encouraging their partners, their business alliances, these smaller companies who they have direct data feeds to and from, to also adopt these same types of tools, because otherwise the attacker is going to go after the weakest link, which is going to be an SMB that has direct access to that enterprise's data.
The Home Depot hack.
That was the biggest one, but if you really look at all of the ones lately, it's pretty much been, it's coming in through some smaller system.
We sometimes call it third, fourth, fifth, and sixth party security and risk management.
Yeah, we call it island hopping, where basically they're jumping from small to small to small until they find one that has the connection to their actual target, and then they're jumping into that target.
Well, you know, Andy Grove, many years ago, he was one of the founders of Intel, recognized early on that the consumer marketplace was driving business needs. The consumer marketplace was in front. And now we're in a point where we see how critical it is for the consumer marketplace to have the tools and be educated. But I think it's a qualitative difference between then and now, but consumers are the first line.
Consumers are the first line. Consumers work with smaller businesses work with larger businesses. And so something that affects at any point in that chain can spread across that spectrum very quickly. And we've seen it. We've seen it happen quite a bit. So yeah, it is critical that all businesses really look at this. Even though enterprises are the target, they may not be the entry point.
I have a question for you right on the point of supporting hybrid work scenarios where some employees work on site, some work remotely. How is that going to be? What kind of changes does one have to consider if they're going to take simulation to do a hybrid workplace?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we're seeing now. Obviously, we're seeing a push to it because everybody's got to not come into the office every day for a little while. And so this is something that a lot of businesses and enterprises, especially enterprises which have been traditionally physical office focused, are waking up to. And it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it is beneficial to the employee and it gives more to the company, and that's great. But it's also a bit of a problem because we're talking about companies that even if they had work from home allowances, they were restricted. It was a limited number of people. They were tightly controlled because it was a limited number of people. Well, now suddenly 80, 90% of your staff is working remote. And the systems that were set up to support the 5% who was working remote before are horribly overtaxed, and they were never designed to scale that fast. And they can scale, and that's a good thing, and they're being scaled. But like a particular story that I have seen on occasion after occasion in the last 6 months, people set up VPN concentrators so that more employees can work remote and they can access legacy resources that are in our data center, right? But the IT staff didn't realize that the default for these VPNs was split tunneling.
Oh.
And so now you've got basically anything going back and forth to the company is going over the VPN, but all the other traffic is just going over their regular internet connection. And that means what you've done is create a bridge between the outside world and the data center. And again, as Moshe said with his example, this is a settings and configuration switch. This isn't a huge reconfiguration. It's not a gigantic reinstallation or anything like that. It's a switch that says don't allow split tunneling. But if you don't test for that kind of thing, you may not realize that I have had a couple of customers who honestly didn't realize that was happening, because when they ping that remote device, it's going over the VPN because they're pinging from company resource to company resource.
Well,
Right.
I'd like to wrap up this discussion with kind of a question that'll give you an opportunity to kind of stress your main points. I want you to take your crystal ball out and tell me how you will be advocating for breach and attack protections a year from now. What's going to be different a year from now versus today?
Yeah, I mean, I can go first. So I think what we're going to be advocating for a year from now is the furtherance of this move to proactive security. This idea of we are testing every week or every month, whatever works best for the organization. And we are always getting the most updated methods and techniques to test with. And this idea that what we're seeing now has proved that even the biggest enterprises can be flexible. And so what we're going to see is employees who demand that they remain flexible next year. And so we are going to have a situation where these technologies have to scale, and they have to scale at a pretty good, fast pace. And that means we need continuous testing. And so where I see the BAS market in a year from now is really offering that continuous testing. Our employees want to be able to work from home 4 out of 5 days a week. Okay, we could change the systems to make that happen, but we need to make sure it's done safely. And not only now, but next week when we implement the policy, and 3 months after that when we reevaluate the policy, and 3 months after that when we make a final decision. We need to be doing testing at each one of these steps along the way so that we have the right quantitative data to make the right decisions about, can I do this safely for my company? And so I see us being a driver of safely making those changes. And that's key. The one constant in business is there will always be change. And now that we're seeing what change looks like from a traditional technology perspective, when we have a sea change in that area, that's driving home the need for this.
Yeah. Moshe.
I think that when I look forward, I think that the addressing the rate of pace, as Mike answered, I think is key. But I think that what we'll see is that companies who are able to provide a consistent way of quantifying security performance on as many layers, perspectives as possible. So not only just the security controls and employees, but application security testing, IoT integration, third-party integration. As if we're able to provide quantifiable metrics on the security performance of all of these different aspects in a company's security posture, this will make security now a business enabler. right? They will be able to be more confident in saying, yes, we need to do that, or yes, we can do that, or no, we have to fix something first, and then we will be able to do it with confidence in a language that C-level executives can understand. Okay, it's a number. We were at 47 before, now we were at 73.
That's
This is what
critical.
we need to do to change it, okay? Because trying to explain the intricacies and details is not effective. It hasn't been effective. It won't be effective. You will not have security professionals in the board. They will understand it's important, but it needs to be conveyed in a language that they understand.
Absolutely.
And so that's the vision, to be able to provide comprehensive security ratings, testings, and consistent ratings across the board in order to become more confident in enabling the business forward.
Yeah, and in a year from now, when we do have the first round of fines that have been adjudicated through the court system, and we know that these regulatory agencies are going to be able to successfully level these fines, the board is going to need those numbers. The board is going to need those metrics. And that's where something like a breach and attack simulation, where a Cymulate is going to really be incredibly powerful for them.
Yes, this is a management strategy. We have to be
It is.
prepared
It's
for that.
become a business problem. Security is no longer a technology problem. It's a reputation problem. It's a bottom line problem. It's a revenue problem. These are now board level issues, and they weren't 6 months ago, but they will absolutely be in every industry in the next year.
Well, I've heard from so many people, and you just confirmed this, that the unspoken question that the business person has on their mind when the security person walks in, are we protected? That kind of like, are we secure? And that's the question that we have to substantiate with programs, with metrics, with all of that. I want to thank both of you for joining us today for this discussion on breach and attack simulation. Proactive security is indeed something that's in our future, and we have many, many good tools. You guys tick most of the boxes that members want, modular systems, flexible reports, all of those things. And you do some real-time real attack simulations following MITRE attack and respectedness standards. So you're right in there with the players. Thank you very, very much. And I hope they want to thank the audience as well for listening. Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you, Priscilla, for having us. Bye-bye.